Christmas of that year was supposed to be simple. Just me and my two best friends, Mark and Tyler, hiding from the chaos of our families and the noise of real life. We were all in our early 20s, exhausted from work, burnt out, and desperate for a quiet holiday where we could just exist without responsibilities. A rented cabin an hour outside of town sounded perfect. It sat tucked halfway into the woods, technically part of a neighborhood, though calling it that was generous. The nearest cabin was nearly a mile away, barely visible through the trees when the sun was out. We arrived on Christmas Eve with enough food, snacks, and beer to last a week. Mark had even lugged his Xbox in a tote bag like it was a sacred relic. Our plan was simple: play games, sleep, eat, repeat. So that's exactly what we did. We ended up drinking and screaming at each other through video game matches until around 3 in the morning. Not exactly a warm, sentimental holiday, but it was fun. When I finally stumbled into my room, I passed out instantly. The cabin was old and freezing. The wood creaked constantly, the walls groaned from the cold, and the wind rattled the windows every few minutes. But exhaustion can drown out anything. I didn't care about the weird noises, not until something woke me up. I opened my eyes to pitch-black darkness. I didn't know the time, but it felt like early morning, maybe 3 or 4 a.m., when the world outside is dead quiet and the silence inside feels heavier than it should. I lay there for a moment, trying to figure out what pulled me from sleep. Then I heard it again, slow, soft footsteps coming from the living room. Not casual walking, not one of my friends stumbling around half-drunk. These steps were careful, spaced apart, like someone deliberately trying not to make noise. I blinked a few times, trying to shake off the fog in my head. My first thought was that maybe Mark or Tyler had gotten up to grab water or go to the bathroom. I waited for the footsteps to move toward the hallway, toward the bathroom door, or maybe toward the kitchen. But they didn't. They stayed in the same area, right near the front of the cabin. It sounded almost like pacing, a slow back and forth on the old wooden boards. I wanted to call out, ask if everything was all right, but something in my gut held me back. Yelling into a dark living room from a dark bedroom felt wrong. And if it wasn't one of them, I wasn't sure I wanted whoever it was to know I was awake. Eventually, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. I waited another minute before letting myself sink back into the bed. Somehow, I drifted off again. When sunlight finally pushed through the big living room windows and I dragged myself out of bed, the guys were already awake. Tyler was on the couch, bleary-eyed, and Mark was digging through the fridge. I joked about someone creeping around at 4 in the morning, expecting them to laugh or tease me. Instead, they both stared at me like I'd spoken another language. "We all went to bed at 3, Mark said. Nobody got up. Tyler nodded, rubbing his temples. "Dude, I didn't move once. I slept like a rock." I tried to laugh it off. Maybe I'd dreamed it. Maybe the cabin creaked in a weird rhythm. Maybe I'd misheard something. But when I glanced toward the front door, the breath caught in my throat. The deadbolt was undone. The handle locked, too. Completely unlocked. The door wasn't open, but the locks were. I asked if either of them had gone outside. Both shook their heads. And when I pointed out the locks, I watched the color drain from their faces, because all of us remembered locking the door when we got back from unloading the car last night. Tyler tried to rationalize it first. Old door. Maybe the wind rattled it loose? Happens in old cabins, Mark agreed too quickly. Yeah, man. These locks are probably 20 years old. Could have slipped. We all wanted to believe that more than anything, so eventually we let it go. The day passed in a blur of blankets, movies, and video games. The cabin stayed freezing no matter how high we turned the thermostat, and the constant snowfall outside made everything feel trapped and isolated. We exchanged stupid Christmas gifts, FaceTimed our families, and ate junk food until we were stuffed. By evening, the weirdness from the night before had mostly faded into the background. But something about the darkness outside was different this time. We were in the living room playing a party game on the Xbox, yelling, laughing, throwing snacks at each other. Yet every few minutes, I found myself glancing at the window beside the TV. The blackness on the other side felt wrong. Heavy. Too close. The trees outside were barely 10 feet away, but I couldn't see a single branch. Just an empty sheet of darkness pressed against the glass like a blindfold. I didn't want to freak myself out, so I tried to ignore it. But that tingling at the back of my neck wouldn't go away. We didn't stay up nearly as late as the night before. Mark tapped out early around 1 a.m., saying he was exhausted. Me and Tyler stayed up talking for a little longer before we both gave in to tiredness and went to our rooms. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The window beside me was like an eye staring in. I kept imagining someone standing outside, nose almost touching the glass, watching. Eventually, I must have dozed off because when I woke again, it was to the same sound as last night. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate footsteps moving slowly across the living room floor. This time, I snapped awake instantly. I didn't move at first. I just listened, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Whoever was out there wasn't walking around randomly. They were pacing again. And unlike last night, I knew for a fact it wasn't Mark or Tyler because I would have heard them leave their rooms and walk down the hallway. These steps came straight from the living room. I counted them under my breath. 7 slow steps. Pause. 5 steps back. Pause. Then 1, 2, 3 more, shifting direction, as if the person was turning to listen. After a full minute of listening, the adrenaline finally forced me to move. I slid out of bed and walked toward my bedroom door, planning to at least peek out or maybe confront whoever was there. But before I could grab the handle, the footsteps changed direction. They moved from the living room to the hallway. Steady, heavy, coming closer. Each step made the old floorboards press and groan. I held my breath as they passed directly in front of my door. I could see the shadow shift under the tiny crack of light at the bottom. Whoever it was stopped right in front of Mark's room. No sound. No movement. I had no idea what to do. My body locked up completely. My hand trembled as I slowly twisted my doorknob and pushed it just barely open so I could look through the crack. And that's when I saw him. A man. Huge. At least 6'4", with long, tangled hair and a thick beard. He stood completely still, facing Mark's door, his shoulders rising and falling with slow breaths. He wasn't touching the door. He was just watching it. Waiting. I pulled back instantly, leaving the door cracked open because closing it felt louder. My heart hammered so hard I thought the man might hear it. Seconds passed. Maybe 10, maybe 30. It felt like an hour. Then the boards creaked again. Fast. Before I could even step back, my bedroom door flew open. The man filled the doorway, his frame taking up all the space. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring straight at me like he'd already been watching through the door before pushing it. His face didn't show anger or fear or surprise, just this hollow, emotionless stare that froze every part of me. I screamed without meaning to, pure instinct. The man didn't flinch, not even a twitch. Within seconds, Tyler burst out of his room yelling. Mart followed right after, still half asleep. Tyler saw the man and lunged forward, trying to grab him or knock him away. But the man moved with terrifying strength and speed. He grabbed Tyler by the collar and slammed him into the wall like he weighed nothing. Tyler dropped to the floor, gasping. Mark froze, eyes wide, unable to process anything. Then, without warning, the man bolted. He turned and sprinted down the hall through the living room and toward the front door. He didn't try to fight us. He didn't try to finish whatever he had planned. He just ran. By the time we reached the living room, the front door was wide open, cold air pouring in, snow blowing across the floor. He disappeared into the forest. We locked every lock, every window, every latch we could find, and called the police. Waiting those 20 minutes felt like waiting hours. Every creak, every gust of wind sounded like footsteps coming back. Each of us held whatever makeshift weapon we could grab. Kitchen knives, the iron fire poker, even one of Mark's Xbox controllers because he panicked and grabbed the first thing he saw. The man never returned. And when the police showed up, they didn't find footprints, didn't find signs of forced entry, didn't find anything. Just our shaken voices and a cabin that suddenly felt too small and too unprotected. We never found out who he was or what he wanted. The owner of the cabin dealt with most of the investigation since technically it was his property that had been broken into. One theory we came up with was that maybe the intruder was looking for the owner and didn't realize the place had been rented out. Maybe seeing 3 people inside made him back off. Or maybe he came to hurt us and changed his mind when he saw we weren't alone. None of us know for sure. We probably never will. All I do know is that whatever would have happened if I hadn't screamed, if Tyler hadn't reacted, if any of us had slept deeper that night, I don't want to think about it. Because looking back at the way he stared at us, blank and silent, I'm not convinced he left out of fear. I think he left because he wasn't finished, and because he knew he could come back whenever he wanted. And the worst part? Sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night now, I still hear those slow, careful footsteps. This happened in the winter, right around Christmas time. I lived with my girlfriend Sarah, and since we both live far from our families, we almost always spent the holidays traveling on long road trips. This particular year, we were heading to Sarah's family home for Christmas. The drive was just under 8 hours. Usually it wasn't too bad, but maybe we'd just been lucky before. We packed everything, bags, gifts, suitcases, and shoved them into the trunk, planning to leave early on Christmas Eve so we could get there that night and spend all of Christmas Day with her family. The first couple of hours on the road were quiet. Most people must have already finished their travel because the roads were practically empty, just us cutting through the cold winter morning. After a while, I pulled into a small gas station to fill up the tank and stretch. It looked abandoned. There wasn't a single other car in sight. Sarah stayed inside the car with the heat running while I ran inside to pay and grab a couple drinks. The moment I opened the door, the harsh wind slapped my face, and the snow came up nearly to my shins. The lot hadn't been plowed at all, and I had to push my way through half a foot of slush just to reach the entrance. Inside, the silence was immediate. No music, no noises, no clerk, nothing. The lights were on, humming faintly, but the place felt hollow. I walked through the aisles, grabbed a couple of drinks, and walked to the counter, waiting for someone to appear from the back. No one came. After calling out twice and pushing the door to the back room slightly open, I realized the gas station was completely empty. I didn't hear anyone, didn't see anyone. It was eerie, but I figured maybe the clerk had stepped out for a second or was restocking somewhere I couldn't see. After a minute, I'd put the drinks back and walked outside, hoping I could at least use the pump even if the place looked abandoned. The second I stepped outside, my heart dropped. A man was standing right at Sarah's window, his face inches from the glass, bundled in heavy winter clothing, knocking over and over. He was hunched, impatient, tapping the window like he expected her to immediately obey whatever he wanted. The moment he saw me, he stiffened, backed away fast, and started walking quickly toward the road, never looking back. I rushed to the car, watching him vanish down the snow-covered shoulder. Sarah looked rattled. She told me he'd come out of nowhere right after I'd stepped inside, and all he kept repeating was, "Roll down the window," knocking constantly. He didn't explain why, didn't say anything else. She kept the doors locked and refused to respond because she got a terrible feeling from him. So did I. I didn't bother staying another second. I turned the car on and pulled out, wanting to get away from that gas station as fast as possible. But because of everything that happened, we'd lost too much time. Our main route didn't have another gas station for a long stretch, long enough that we didn't want to risk running out of fuel in the middle of nowhere in freezing temperatures, so we had to take a detour. The snow, the wind, and the detour itself slowed us down even more. By late night, we were still hours away. Both of us were exhausted, and Sarah's eyes kept closing between conversations. We finally agreed to pull into a small roadside motel for the night and finish the drive in the morning. Sarah called her family to let them know we'd be arriving early on Christmas morning instead. I found a little motel on the side of the highway. The neon sign flickered, but it was on, glowing dimly in the cold. The parking lot was empty. Christmas Eve night isn't exactly a popular night to stay in a motel, but something felt off anyway. I walked inside, relieved when I saw a clerk behind the desk. They checked us in without much small talk. I grabbed our travel bags and got us into a small but warm room. We practically collapsed the moment we lay down. I set an alarm for 5 a.m. so we could get back on the road and still arrive early enough for Christmas morning. I slept like a rock. So did Sarah. For the entire few hours, neither of us woke up once. When my alarm buzzed, my entire body protested. I didn't want to move. I let Sarah sleep while I packed our things, then stepped outside to load them into the car. The cold had gotten worse. The wind was violent, whipping loose snow across the parking lot and making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet. It didn't look like anyone else had been there during the night. I shut the trunk and hurried back in, telling Sarah it was time to go and that we needed to beat the storm before it got worse. I headed to the front office to check out, expecting to see the clerk again. But the office was empty. Lights on. Door unlocked. No worker. It was the same feeling all over again, like the gas station. The same unsettling emptiness. I stepped closer, calling out. No response. That's when I noticed the papers scattered across the floor behind the counter, like someone had left in a rush. A chair slightly pushed back. A pen on the ground. A half-open drawer. My chest tightened. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I backed away, walked out fast, and sprinted down the row of rooms to get Sarah. I yanked the door open, out of breath, and told her we needed to leave immediately. The urgency in my voice must have told her everything she needed to know because she didn't ask questions. She just grabbed her shoes and followed me to the car. My hands were shaking as I turned the ignition. The wind blasted the windshield and the car struggled through the snow as we pushed out of the parking lot. As we circled the building to get back onto the highway, something caught my eye. A shape on the side of the motel. My breath froze. It was him. The same guy from the gas station. Same winter coat, same build. Standing partially behind the corner of the building, watching our car. Not moving. Not approaching. Just watching. Even through the blur of snow, I knew it was him. My heart hammered. I pulled onto the highway, gripping the wheel so tight my hands hurt. Sarah immediately dialed 911. We drove toward the next gas station the dispatcher directed us to and waited for officers to meet us there. When they arrived, we explained everything. The officer listening frowned, especially when we mentioned how the man from the gas station had somehow appeared at the motel hours away without us noticing. He said it didn't make sense. He looked under the car, checking for damage or tampering. That's when he found it. A tracker stuck underneath the back wheel well. A small, cold, black device. The man must have stuck it onto our car when he approached Sarah's window. It took more than an hour for officers to visit both the gas station and the motel. When they came back with updates, me and Sarah both went pale. They told us both workers. The gas station clerk and the motel clerk were officially missing. They hadn't shown up, hadn't contacted anyone, and the buildings showed signs of sudden abandonment. No struggle, just workers who seemed to vanish mid-shift. No footprints leading away in the snow that matched theirs. The only potential connection was the man following us. My guess was simple. He must have already done something to the gas station worker before we arrived, something we unknowingly interrupted. Maybe he thought I saw something I shouldn't have. Maybe he panicked. Maybe he thought he needed to get rid of us too. He followed us all night, waiting for the right moment. But thanks to Sarah locking the doors and us leaving quickly and then leaving the motel just as fast, he didn't get it. The police never found him. Not a trace. Only one blurry image captured on the gas station's security camera, just enough to confirm there had been another person there that night. Nothing more. No face. No clear features. No identity. It was the most unsettling Christmas morning of our lives. We spent the holiday with Sarah's family, but our minds were elsewhere, replaying every moment, realizing how close we had come to becoming missing persons ourselves. And in the weeks after, we never got updates. None. Both workers are still missing, and as far as we know, the man who followed us is still out there. And the worst part is knowing that if we had waited even a few minutes longer at either place, we probably would have been missing too. I spent that Christmas completely alone. Most years, the timing worked out better, but because of work and where my family lived, this was one of the rare holidays where I had no plans and no visitors. My house was small but comfortable, tucked in a quiet neighborhood where everyone minded their own business. Even though it wasn't ideal to spend Christmas alone, I still tried to make the best of it, watching movies, drinking coffee, and going for walks if the weather wasn't brutal. That Christmas morning began calm enough to make me believe the day would stay easy. I woke to light snow drifting past my bedroom window, soft and quiet, not a full storm yet. I made coffee, popped Home Alone on the TV, and sat on the couch with breakfast. It felt peaceful in that lazy holiday way. No noise outside, no responsibilities, just the slow pace of a winter morning. Around noon, the snowfall picked up, but it wasn't anything dangerous. Just the kind of holiday weather that makes everything look more festive. I decided to go for a quick walk before it got worse. The neighborhood was empty, quiet, and almost too still. Christmas lights glowed from porches and roof edges, wreaths hung on doors, and snow covered the lawns in clean white sheets. I didn't see a single car on the road, not even kids outside playing. The only person I passed was a man shoveling his driveway a couple blocks over, and even he gave me a short nod before going back to his work. By the time I got home, the wind had started pushing snow across the street in twisting spirals. I figured the forecast was probably right about a storm rolling in by evening, but I didn't mind. I had blankets, food, and movies lined up. I wasn't planning to go back outside anyway. The storm hit earlier and harder than expected. Around 4, the snow went from steady to blinding in minutes. The wind slammed into the house with a kind of force that made me feel like I should double-check the windows even though they'd always held through storms in the past. They rattled just enough to make me uneasy, but not enough for me to panic. The contrast between the violent weather outside and the calm inside the house almost made the silence indoors feel unnatural. I made a simple dinner and put on another movie. But by 7, the storm was so loud it drowned out the TV. I heard thumps outside, things hitting the siding or rolling across the yard. Probably branches or loose holiday decorations from someone's porch. It startled me a few times, but I didn't think too deeply about it. Weather this bad always caused debris to crash around. I was about an hour into the movie when I heard the first knock. A single, sharp knock on the front door. It sliced through the noise of the storm in a way nothing else had. I froze on the couch and stared toward the hallway. No one came to my door on Christmas. And no one, absolutely no one, should have been out walking in that kind of weather. I muted the TV. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the storm pounding against the house. Then came the second knock, this time 3 taps in a row. Not desperate, not loud, just deliberate, rhythmical. Like whoever stood outside didn't want to scare me, but also didn't care if they did. I stood up slowly. I didn't get close to the door. I stayed far enough back that no one could see me through the narrow side window. I didn't make a sound. My house didn't have one of those peepholes, only the side glass framed next to the door. If I looked through it, anyone outside would see me instantly. I waited. The wind roared, shaking the door in its frame. After a long stretch of nothing, whoever was out there didn't knock again. I forced myself to believe it must have been some confused person trying to find shelter, or someone knocking on the wrong house. But the timing, the storm, and the emptiness of the entire neighborhood didn't sit right. I returned to the couch, pretending the uneasiness would pass. It didn't. Every time the storm shifted, every thud against the siding made me jolt a little. The movie didn't even register anymore. 10 minutes later, I heard a new sound, something dragging across the snow. Slow, steady, scraping. Starting at the front of the house, pulling across the yard, moving around toward the side. I couldn't see anything from where I sat, but the noise was unmistakable. Something or someone was circling the house. I stared toward the hallway, tracking the sound as it crept toward the back door. The dragging stopped directly behind the house. My back door didn't have curtains or blinds, not my smartest design choice, so I hesitated to even peek around the corner. That's when I heard the knocks again. 3 of them. Slow. Calm. I stood up, my legs shaking. I leaned my head just far enough around the hallway to see the back door. A face, just the eyes, stared through the glass. Wide, unblinking, and fixed right at me. I jerked back immediately, heart hammering in my chest. I barely saw the man, but what I did see was wrong. Something about the way he stared made my skin crawl. He didn't look shocked that I noticed him. He didn't move. He just watched. I grabbed my phone and called 911. I whispered to the operator, explaining someone was at my back door, that he'd circled the house, that he wouldn't leave. My eyes kept flicking toward the hallway, terrified he'd step out of sight and try one of the other doors. For 10 minutes, maybe 15. I stayed frozen near the couch, whispering updates to the operator. The storm was so loud it swallowed almost every other sound, but I kept thinking I heard movement. Little crunches in the snow. Faint thumps. Then it happened. A scraping sound at the back door, like metal on glass. Before I could even process it, the entire door exploded inward. A violent crash filled the house, glass shattering across the floor, the frame splintering apart. The wind blasted inside, so strong it drowned out everything else. Snow swirled in and pelted the walls. I ducked behind the couch, shaking uncontrollably. My breathing was too loud, but I couldn't control it. The operator kept asking if I was safe, but I couldn't speak. The only sound in the house besides the storm was my heartbeat and the occasional shift of broken glass sliding across the floor. I knew the man was inside. I couldn't hear his footsteps, but that somehow made it worse. The idea that he was silently moving through my house, hidden somewhere in that cold darkness, made every second stretch like it might be my last. For 20 minutes, I stayed hidden behind the couch, barely daring to breathe. I imagined him crouched somewhere close, listening, waiting. The storm outside muted everything to the point I had no idea if he was a foot away or across the room. Every shadow felt alive. Every gust of wind sounded like a step. Then knocks at the front door. Not frantic, not threatening. Strong. Official. A police officer yelling through the storm, announcing themselves, demanding that whoever was inside show their hands. I shot up from behind the couch and ran to the front door, flinging it open. The officer pulled me out onto the porch immediately, shielding me from the wind. 2 more officers rushed inside with flashlights drawn. But the man was gone. Inside, they found melting, wet footprints scattered around the living room and down the hallway. Some prints circled near the kitchen, others toward the back of the house. It almost looked like he'd wandered aimlessly after breaking in, drifting from room to room. There weren't signs of him searching aggressively or trying to pry anything open. He just moved through the house. And then left. The footprints led out the shattered back door, into the yard, straight toward the fields behind the property. The officers followed them for a few minutes, but the blizzard covered everything so fast the trail disappeared right in front of them. By the time they came back inside to talk to me, the house was freezing. Snow had piled into the kitchen and hallway. The wind kept pushing the remaining shards of glass across the floor like small sliding pieces of ice. After they left that night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat on the edge of my bed with every light in the house turned on, listening to the storm rattle what was left of the door. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every gust of wind made me think the man had come back and was standing just outside, watching through the naked window frames. When the sun finally came up, the storm had eased into a gentle, eerie quiet. The officers returned to take another look around. They checked the yard again, checked the nearby streets, checked any spot where he might have been hiding. But the snow had erased everything. The world was clean and white again, like nothing had ever happened. Before leaving, one officer said something that has stayed in my mind ever since. He told me that storms like that bring out people looking for unlocked homes, places to hide or steal from, knowing the weather will cover their tracks. But when I told him about the knocking and the eyes at the back door, he shook his head. He said some people knock just to see who answers or who doesn't. They want to know if someone is home. They want to know if the house is empty. And by not answering the first time, but then showing myself at the back door, I may have given him the answer he needed. I didn't realize how each small decision shaped what happened. The man could have searched harder. He could have tried to find me. He could have come around the couch, but he didn't. He came in, walked through my home in silence, and then vanished into a storm that erased every trace of him. I still don't know what he wanted. I don't know if he expected me to open the door the first time, or if he was hoping to come into a dark, empty house. I don't know why he watched me so calmly through the glass, or why he broke in with such force only to wander around. I don't know why he never tried to open the door to the room I hid behind. All I know is that he saw me. He knew I was alone, and the storm gave him everything he needed. This was the first year I'd be spending Christmas alone. It sounds sadder than it was, honestly. I couldn't afford the flight back to my hometown, and I couldn't take off enough vacation days to make it worth the cost anyway. I kept telling myself I'd make the best of it. I always enjoyed seeing other people's decorations, especially driving or walking around on Christmas Day. Something about the empty streets, glowing houses, and the soft cold made it feel peaceful, like the world had taken a breath and held it for a moment. So when I woke up that morning, I tried to lean into that quiet comfort. I turned on the old cartoon Grinch movie, the one I watched every year as a kid, and made a nice breakfast with coffee strong enough to warm me through the winter air drifting inside my drafty windows. After that, I spent about an hour FaceTiming my parents and siblings, laughing at the chaos of everyone talking over each other. It made the apartment feel less empty. It was probably around noon when I realized I didn't have anything else I needed to do. No obligations, no errands, no cooking, nothing. At some point, I decided to go grab the mail. I almost didn't bother. No one sends anything important on Christmas. But the walk to the porch would at least break up the stillness. When I opened the door, though, something immediately pulled me out of that cozy Christmas mindset. There were footprints in the snow on my porch. Not fresh ones. Not the powdery, crisp kind that melt slightly into the upper layer of snow. These were frozen over, pressed deep into a layer that had iced overnight. They weren't from a delivery driver or a neighbor. They were hours old, made long before I'd even woken up, when the temperature had dropped so low the air felt like broken glass. I stared at them for a long moment, trying to make sense of the pattern. One pair, adult-sized, going right up to my door, then turning away. I looked around the quiet street, even though I already knew no one was there. The sky was pale, the street empty, every house closed up and still. I grabbed my mail quickly and went back inside, shutting the door harder than I meant to. I couldn't decide if I felt scared or just unsettled. It didn't feel like a threat exactly, just wrong. Wrong enough that my body felt tense without any clear reason. But what was I supposed to do about footprints? There wasn't any crime in someone standing on a porch. It was Christmas. I told myself to let it go. I tried to enjoy the rest of the afternoon. I put on some Hallmark movies, opened the gifts and letters my family had mailed me, and let the hours crawl by. But every now and then I'd catch myself glancing toward the front window, wondering who had been there and why they didn't knock, or why they came so early in the morning when the cold was brutal and the roads were dead quiet. Around 5, I checked the weather. It was supposed to get a lot colder as the evening went on, a sharp drop that would make the air almost dangerous. I'd been cooped up all day, and the freezing temperature hadn't quite hit yet, so I figured I'd go for a walk around the neighborhood while I still could. Something about the Christmas lights and calm streets usually helped me relax. I bundled up and stepped outside. The snow crunched under my boots, and my breath drifted like smoke through the dim glow of the street lamps. All the houses looked warm and perfect from the outside, lights twinkling, wreaths swinging slightly in the gentle wind. I walked slowly, letting myself enjoy the peace. My neighborhood was always quiet, but Christmas quiet was different, thicker, heavier. Like the world was waiting for something. As I walked, I noticed someone else moving through the neighborhood. They were on the opposite side of the road, bundled up, walking with their heads slightly down. The only other person I'd seen all day. I didn't think much of it at first. People took Christmas walks all the time. But a few minutes later, they passed me again, not from behind. Not continuing their route. They crossed in front of me, moving the opposite direction I'd last seen them go. It made me do a double take. There was no way for us to have looped around each other that fast unless they turned around the second they passed me the first time. And even then, the timing didn't add up. It felt off enough that I slowed down and watched them disappear behind a row of bushes at a corner house. Eventually, I reached a split where I could either keep exploring or head home. I stood there for a moment, telling myself the guy wasn't the reason I didn't want to keep walking. But something else tugged at me, an instinct that something wasn't right. The air felt colder than it should have. The street too quiet, the shadows too still. I decided to go home. As soon as I stepped inside and closed the door, I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I took off my gloves, then my scarf, and had just started untying my boots when a knock hit the door so suddenly and so sharply that my entire body jolted. It hadn't even been 30 seconds since I came in. I froze. My boots were still half on, and I stood there trembling, staring at the door like looking long enough might make it vanish. Something deep in my chest told me this wasn't a normal knock. It felt wrong, urgent, forceful. My heart kicked up, thudding so hard I could feel it echo across my ribs. Cautiously, I stepped closer and looked through the peephole. A man stood there very close, wearing a baseball cap tilted downward so the brim hid most of his face. But there was something about his posture, something familiar. I assumed for a moment it was the same man I'd seen walking earlier. The timing made sense. And yet, it didn't. He knocked again. Harder. I knew he had to have seen me walk in. He must have been watching. He must have followed me up the street and waited for the exact second I shut the door. "What do you need?" I called out, trying to sound firm even though my voice was shaking. He didn't answer. He didn't move. He just stood there, the brim of his cap angled so I couldn't see his eyes. Seconds passed, stretching painfully long. Then he banged on the door again. Not a knock. A violent, angry slam of the side of his fist against the wood. I stepped back from the door, breath quickening. I asked again what he wanted, why he was here, and watched through the peephole as he pressed himself even closer to the door, silent. He didn't speak, didn't gesture, didn't react. He just hovered there like he was listening for something inside. And then he grabbed the door handle. He twisted hard, rattling it, pushing his weight into it like he was trying to shove his way in. The door shook violently, the hinges crying out. I backed away as he threw his whole body into it, slamming his shoulder against the wood again and again. The frame rattled. The deadbolt vibrated. For a second, I thought it might actually give. It went on for maybe 20 or 30 seconds, long enough for panic to completely take over. Then suddenly, it stopped. Silence fell so abruptly it was dizzying. Then I heard yelling. Multiple voices. I rushed forward and looked through the peephole again. 2 police officers were outside, pinning the man to the ground, cuffing his hands behind his back as he writhed and shouted. I stood there frozen, staring, my mind barely able to process what I was seeing. I hadn't called anyone. I hadn't even touched my phone. It felt like some kind of miracle that they arrived at the exact moment they did, right when he was seconds away from forcing his way inside. Later, when the officers talked to me, I learned the truth. A neighbor had called 911 earlier in the afternoon. They reported a man walking back and forth on our street for hours, circling, stopping, looking at houses, returning, pacing again. They said he stood outside my home more than once, staring at the door, waiting. But the most disturbing part didn't hit me until the police asked if I recognized him. And I did. He wasn't a stranger. He was an ex. Someone I'd broken up with over a decade earlier. Someone who didn't even live in the same state anymore. Someone I hadn't spoken to, not once since the breakup. No messages, no calls. No accidental run-ins, nothing. He had shown up on Christmas Day. He had walked my neighborhood for hours. He had come to my porch before dawn and left those frozen footprints. He had followed me on my walk. He had waited for me to return. And when the police searched him, they found 2 knives on him. In his car, parked a few blocks away, they found a firearm and a roll of duct tape purchased just days earlier. He admitted to nothing. But he didn't have to. Anyone could see what he was likely planning. And sometimes, the scariest part of a horror story is realizing the villain isn't a monster hiding in the snow or a shadow standing in the street. It's someone who once said they loved you. I'd already spent the whole morning and most of the afternoon with my family, so by the time I finally got into my car to head home, all I wanted was to wind down for the rest of the night, maybe watch a holiday movie and fall asleep early. The drive from my parents' house to mine took about 20 minutes. The roads were completely empty, which made sense for Christmas night, but if it hadn't been a holiday, the emptiness would have felt unnerving. Everything outside was so still and quiet that it almost didn't feel real. Like the whole world had paused and I was the only person moving through it. I pulled into my driveway around 9, opened the garage and parked inside. The second I stepped through the door into the house, I flicked on the entrance light and froze. Papers were scattered across the hallway floor. It was the stack of mail I had left neatly piled on the kitchen counter. Now the envelopes were spread randomly, some of them unfolded, as if someone had dropped them and walked through them. I tried not to overthink it. I forced myself to believe they just fell over somehow. Maybe I brushed past them earlier when I was rushing to leave that morning. Maybe I hadn't noticed when they slid off. That explanation wasn't convincing, but I clung to it anyway. I crouched down, gathered the envelopes, and placed them back on the counter. Once they were off the floor, the hallway looked normal again, and I told myself I was just tired. After cleaning up, I walked through the rest of the downstairs rooms and turned on the lights. Everything seemed normal. Nothing moved, nothing missing. I went into the living room and saw my Christmas tree in the corner. It was small and fake and looked a little sad, but it was something. I plugged in its lights, letting the soft glow fill the room, then collapsed onto the couch and turned on a new Netflix Christmas movie. The movie was actually pretty good. It had the cheesy holiday tropes, but also a decent story, and for a while, it pulled me out of the strange feeling I'd had since walking through the door. But every now and then I heard something, nothing loud, just faint creaks like the shifting of weight on old floorboards. Quiet enough that I questioned if I had imagined it. Each time I thought I'd heard something, I paused the movie and listened, holding my breath. But I never heard anything again. The silence that followed made me feel stupid for reacting. Eventually, I just chalked it up to my house settling in the cold. It was older, and in winter it made noises. And I was tired from the entire day with my family. Exhausted, really, so my mind was probably playing tricks on me. By the time the movie ended, I knew the night was over for me. I clicked off the TV, turned off all the downstairs lights, and started up the stairs. The second I stepped into my bedroom and turned on the overhead light, a cold wave rushed through me. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. I couldn't identify it at first. It wasn't obvious or dramatic. Nothing was overturned or destroyed. But the room wasn't how I had left it. The air felt disturbed. The arrangement felt slightly off. Like something had been touched, moved, shifted just enough for me to sense it without knowing what was different. My stomach tightened. Every moment from the second I'd walked in the door suddenly stitched together in a way that made me feel sick. The mail on the floor. The strange noises during the movie. The quiet. The stillness. The fact that the house had felt off in a way I kept pushing away. Someone had been in my house. Or was still in my house. My body went numb, a mixture of fear and adrenaline flooding my chest. My heart started pounding so hard that it felt like it echoed through my ribs. I backed out of the bedroom slowly, carefully, and stepped into the hallway. From the top of the stairs, I leaned forward just enough to look down, trying to hear anything, breathing, footsteps, movement, anything that might tell me I wasn't alone. But there was nothing. No sound, no motion. The house was still. Too still. My mind spun through options. I could lock myself in my room and call the police. I could try to run out the front door. I could shout something to scare them off. I didn't know what to do. Fear was loud in my head, making it difficult to think. I took a slow step down the stairs, then another, keeping my back close to the wall. Every step felt like a gamble. When I got to the bottom, I hesitated, listening again. The silence was absolute. My voice came out shaky and barely above a whisper. "Is anyone here?" No answer. My chest was tight as I tried again, louder, forcing the words out. "I've called the cops." "Hello?" And that was when I realized, my voice echoing through the empty house, my own words bouncing back at me. I hadn't called the cops. I hadn't even taken out my phone. I was standing in the middle of my dark downstairs, announcing empty threats into the silence. I turned and started up the stairs, planning to get to my bedroom, close the door, lock it, call the police, and wait until help came. I was halfway up when it happened. Footsteps. Fast footsteps. A sudden rush of movement from the living room. The sound made my blood turn to ice. I whipped around, heart slamming against my chest. It was too dark to see clearly, but I saw the tree's branches sway violently, like something brushed past them, and a figure, just a shadow, darted away from it. My body moved before my mind did. I ran down the stairs and followed the sound into the kitchen, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I heard the back door jerk open, slamming lightly against the siding, and cold air rushed in. By the time I reached the threshold, whoever it was had already sprinted into the darkness outside. I just stood there, frozen, staring into the night. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. The yard was pitch black except for the faint glow of distant streetlights. The figure was gone. I couldn't see anything but falling snow and the empty space where someone had just been. Eventually, I snapped out of it, slammed the door shut, locked it, and then locked it again. My fingers trembled as I dialed the police with shaky breaths. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting the figure to appear again, even though I knew they were gone, or hoped they were. When the officers arrived, they checked the house thoroughly. Every room. Every closet. The garage. The yard. They found no one. No signs of forced entry except the back door unlocked, which they said might have already been unlocked without me realizing. They weren't much help, but I didn't blame them. Nothing was missing as far as I could tell. Nothing valuable was gone. The intruder didn't take anything. They didn't even appear to search for anything. It was as if they had been trying not to be noticed until I came home. And that thought still makes my skin crawl. In the days after, I tried to make sense of it. I tried convincing myself they must have broken in just before I came home. Maybe they were trying to steal something and panicked when they heard the garage door open. Maybe they rushed through the hallway, knocked over the mail, hid somewhere downstairs, and waited for the right moment to escape. That's the explanation I kept telling myself, the one that made the most sense, the one that kept me from losing sleep. But it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain the noises I heard during the movie, the faint creaking I kept pausing to check. The house is quiet at night, always has been. It doesn't make sounds like that, not repeatedly, not in that slow, rhythmic way that mimics footsteps. It doesn't explain how still the living room was every time I paused the movie. If the person really was hiding in there the whole time, watching me sit on the couch for hours, waiting for me to go to bed, it doesn't explain how they stayed quiet for so long, until that final moment they bolted. It doesn't explain the feeling I got in my bedroom. The feeling that something had been moved, something touched, something disturbed in a way I didn't see but felt. And it definitely doesn't explain the one thought that has bothered me the most ever since that night. If they were hiding the entire time I was downstairs, if they were crouched behind something or tucked into a corner, if they were waiting for their chance to escape, why didn't I hear them breathing? Why didn't they move until I went to call the police? Why did they only run when I began heading upstairs? Maybe it really was just some desperate person who panicked and hid until they could run. Maybe I misheard the noises. Maybe the room wasn't as disturbed as I thought. Maybe it was just exhaustion and paranoia mixing together on a silent winter night. Or maybe there really was someone watching me from the dark corner of my living room as I watched an entire movie, completely unaware. Maybe they were waiting. Maybe they were planning something else entirely. I wish I had more answers, but I don't. The police never found anyone. Nothing else happened after that night. No signs of a break-in. No strange noises. No clues that got uncovered. Nothing. But I still think about it. Especially when I sit on my couch with the lights off. Especially when the house gets quiet. Especially when I remember the shape of that figure rushing past the Christmas tree. And every Christmas since, I keep wondering the same thing. How long were they standing there? How long were they watching me? And why didn't they do anything until I started going back upstairs? I'm nearing middle age now, and Christmas hasn't felt magical in a long time. For years, it's mostly meant travel driving or flying to whichever family member was hosting that year, staying a week, then heading back home once it was over. I still enjoyed it in a quiet way, but the gatherings were always loud and crowded, and I've never handled chaos very well. Too many conversations happening at once, kids running through hallways, people sleeping on couches and floors. It drained me more than it energized me. Last year was no different. My cousin was hosting Christmas at his place, a house far outside town, surrounded by open land and long stretches of road with nothing but trees and fields on either side. Because his house was already going to be packed, I decided to rent a nearby Airbnb instead of squeezing in with everyone else. Most of the available options were small cabins scattered around the area. I picked one almost at random, booked it, and drove out a few days before Christmas. The first couple of days went well. I spent most of my time at my cousin's house, catching up with relatives I hadn't seen in years. It felt good to sit around and talk, to hear familiar voices and stories from the past. As Christmas got closer, more people arrived. By Christmas Day, there were close to 20 people crammed into a 3-bedroom house. It was loud, messy, and nonstop. We spent the morning watching the kids tear into their presents, wrapping paper piling up everywhere, then sat down for a big breakfast that lasted hours. By late afternoon, I could feel the exhaustion setting in. I stuck around until dinner, then made an excuse and left early, telling everyone I was tired and needed some quiet. I drove back to the cabin just as the sky was getting dark, the roads nearly empty, snow lining the edges and crunching under my tires. The cabin sat alone among the trees, a short drive outside town. It was small but comfortable, with a porch out front and woods stretching out behind it. When I pulled in and parked, something immediately caught my attention. There were shoe prints in the snow leading straight up to the front door. I stopped and stared at them for a moment. They weren't mine. I'd been gone all day. My first thought was that it must have been the Airbnb host. Maybe he'd stop by to check on something or make sure everything was okay. As I followed the prints with my eyes, I noticed they stopped right at the door. There were no signs anyone had gone inside. It looked like whoever made them had stood there for a bit, maybe waiting, then turned around and walked away. It felt strange, but I didn't think too much of it. I unlocked the door, went inside, and locked it behind me. The cabin was quiet and cold, just the way I'd left it. I tossed my jacket onto the couch and sat down in one of the chairs, finally letting myself relax. I thought briefly about texting the host to ask if he'd stopped by, but I figured if it was important, he would have contacted me. Within minutes, the thought slipped out of my mind. The day had worn me out more than I realized. Sitting there in the silence, I ended up dozing off. I don't know how long I was asleep, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, when the sound of the doorbell snapped me awake. It startled me enough that my heart jumped. For a second, I just sat there, trying to orient myself, then stood up and walked toward the door, rubbing my face and blinking away the sleep. When I opened it, a man stood on the porch. He had medium-length black hair and wore a brown jacket. He smiled briefly and introduced himself as the Airbnb host, sticking his hand out to shake mine. Still groggy and caught off guard, I shook his hand without thinking much about it. He started talking right away, asking how my stay had been, making small talk. I let him lead the conversation while I stood there, nodding along, still not fully awake. He mentioned needing to check on a few things inside the cabin. I don't even remember clearly responding, but somehow the conversation moved forward, and before I fully realized what was happening, he stepped past me and into the cabin. That moment jolted me awake. He walked into the living room and stopped, slowly looking around. He wasn't touching anything, just standing there, turning his head, scanning the walls. It was strange, like he wasn't sure what he was supposed to be looking for. Something about it felt wrong. That's when it really hit me. It was Christmas Day. Why would the host need to come by unannounced, in the evening, on Christmas? If there was an issue, why not text or wait until the next day? The more I watched him, the more uncomfortable I became. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if pretending to inspect things. A cold thought crept into my mind. What if he wasn't the host at all? Trying to stay calm, I spoke up. I told him it wasn't a good time, that I actually had family who might be stopping by soon, and asked if he could come back another day instead. He stopped moving and turned to face me. His expression had changed completely. The friendliness was gone. His face was stiff, and he looked almost irritated, like I'd offended him. Without saying anything, he walked back toward the front door. For a split second, I felt relieved, thinking he was leaving. But instead of opening it, he shut the door and locked it. The sound of the lock clicking sent a surge of fear through me. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran straight for the bedroom, slamming the door behind me and locking it. Almost immediately, I heard him sprint down the hallway. Seconds later, he was throwing his weight against the bedroom door, trying to force it open. Panic set in fast. I looked around the room, my mind racing. My phone and car keys were still in my jacket on the couch in the living room. I was trapped, unarmed, and cut off from help. The door shook with each hit, the frame creaking and cracking. I knew it wouldn't hold for long. My eyes landed on the window at the back of the room. It was old, with a simple handle that pushed outward like a hatch. I rushed to it, my hands shaking as I forced it open. Cold air rushed in as I squeezed through, scraping myself on the frame as I dropped outside into the snow. I didn't stop to think. I ran straight for the tree line behind the cabin, branches whipping against me as I plunged into the woods. Behind me, I heard the bedroom door finally give way. I kept running until my lungs burned, then ducked behind trees and dropped low, trying to stay hidden. From where I was, I could see the front of the cabin through the darkness. Moments later, the man burst out the front door, scanning the area. He stayed there for what felt like forever, maybe 10 minutes, walking around, looking into the trees, trying to figure out where I'd gone. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, praying he wouldn't come any closer. Eventually, he gave up. I watched as he got into his car and drove away, his headlights disappearing down the road. I waited several more minutes just to be sure, before slowly making my way back to the cabin. My hands were numb, my whole body shaking. I grabbed my phone and called for help. Later, during the investigation, the real homeowner and Airbnb host came down to the cabin. They confirmed that the man who had shown up was not him. There was no record of anyone else authorized to enter the property. There wasn't much evidence to go on. The only conclusion anyone could come to was that the man had figured out the cabin was an Airbnb and used that knowledge to gain access. What he planned to do after locking the door will never be known, but it's clear his intentions weren't harmless. That night was a close call, and it's something I still think about every Christmas. I don't think I'll ever be that trusting again.